child actor that my mother even let me go out with late at night past 11 p.m. and had a very...
That night didn't just hurt, it shattered something deep. What started off as a simple teenage memory grew into a rare, unshakable friendship that stretched over 3 decades, binding together 2 black legends who came up during the golden glow of 80s TV. But that same bond left a scar on Jaleel White's heart that refuses to heal. In the silence of the night, Jaleel got one final voice message from Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Just hours later, tragedy struck. The world was blindsided. Malcolm was gone, snatched away at only 48, and after years of keeping quiet, Jaleel finally broke. But when he spoke, it wasn't just grief pouring out. It was truth spilling in a way nobody expected it, because this wasn't just a goodbye. It was an exposure of how black stars were hyped to the heavens when it served Hollywood, but left to crumble the second they stumbled. So the question everybody's asking is, what did Malcolm say in that haunting last message? And why did Jaleel step up and declare, "I won't let them forget who he was"? This wasn't just heartbreak, it was a warning. Don't blink, because this moment flips the script. Even though they never shared a sitcom screen or posed arm in arm at red carpets, something stronger bound them. A bond, a code, a silent oath only those who carried the weight of fame as teenagers could ever truly understand. This story ain't just about TV, and it definitely ain't just about fame. It's about 2 young black boys who were forced to carry the weight of a nation's dreams. And when the cameras shut off, they spent their adult years trying to figure out how to drop that heavy load without losing themselves. Jaleel White entered the world in 1976, but Malcolm-Jamal Warner had already landed 6 years ahead of him. By the early 80s, both of them were already in the game, child actors thrown straight into the machine. But by the mid-80s, everything flipped. Their paths exploded under blinding spotlights, and neither of them would ever get their innocence back. In 1984, Malcolm became Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show. The smooth, funny teen always messing up, but still loved inside America's perfect black household. At just 14 years old, he carried 8 seasons, more than 200 episodes, and cemented himself as TV royalty. Meanwhile, 12-year-old Jaleel was supposed to pop in for just one little guest role on Family Matters. But then, boom, Steve Urkel walked in with the suspenders, the squeaky voice, the oversized glasses, and suddenly the world couldn't breathe without him. Overnight, Jaleel wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural obsession. Urkel was on lunchboxes, toys, cereal commercials, t-shirts. He became bigger than the show itself. By 1991, Family Matters had crashed into the top 10 most watched shows in America, all thanks to one nerd who stole the spotlight. But behind the laughs and catchphrases, the fame came with a brutal price. By the time Jaleel turned 20, the industry didn't even see him as Jaleel White anymore. He was trapped. To Hollywood, he was Urkel, whether he wanted it or not. This story ain't just about TV, and it definitely ain't just about fame. It's about 2 young black boys who were forced to carry the weight of a nation's dreams. And when the cameras shut off, they spent their adult years trying to figure out how to drop that heavy load without losing themselves. Jaleel White entered the world in 1976, but Malcolm-Jamal Warner had already landed 6 years ahead of him. By the early 80s, both of them were already in the game, child actors thrown straight into the machine. But by the mid-80s, everything flipped. Their paths exploded under blinding spotlights, and neither of them would ever get their innocence back. In 1984, Malcolm became Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, the smooth, funny teen always messing up but still loved inside America's perfect black household. At just 14 years old, he carried 8 seasons, more than 200 episodes, and cemented himself as TV royalty. Meanwhile, 12-year-old Jaleel was supposed to pop in for just one little guest role on Family Matters. But then, boom, Steve Urkel walked in with the suspenders, the squeaky voice, the oversized glasses, and suddenly the world couldn't breathe without him. Overnight, Jaleel wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural obsession. Urkel was on lunchboxes, toys, cereal commercials, t-shirts. He became bigger than the show itself. By 1991, Family Matters had crashed into the top 10 most watched shows in America, all thanks to one nerd who stole the spotlight. But behind the laughs and catchphrases, the fame came with a brutal price. By the time Jaleel turned 20, the industry didn't even see him as Jaleel White anymore. He was trapped. To Hollywood, he was Urkel, whether he wanted it or not. No matter how hard he tried, directors just couldn't unsee it. They boxed Jaleel in every single time. He once confessed, I wasn't allowed to grow up in the eyes of the audience. They wanted me to stay Urkel forever. And that sting? Malcolm felt it too, right in his soul. When The Cosby Show ended in '92, Malcolm didn't run back to sitcoms. He pulled back on purpose. He threw himself into reinvention, directing, dropping raw poetry, diving into jazz, even snagging a Grammy nomination. He flexed his talent in shows like Sons of Anarchy and Read Between the Lines. But no matter how high he climbed, he was always introduced the same way. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, Theo from The Cosby Show. A name, a legacy, a label he could never shake. And then came the most chilling words, scribbled in his own journal, uncovered after his passing. I used to wonder, when will people stop looking at me through the lens of their own nostalgia? That wasn't just honesty, it was heartbreak carved into paper. The connection between Malcolm and Jaleel didn't need cameras or magazine covers. It lived in the dark corners when the applause had faded and reality cut deep. No flashy red carpets, no forced reality stunts, just late-night phone calls where the silence said more than words ever could. They didn't have to explain because they already knew. They knew the pain of walking into a room and seeing the hesitation on directors' faces. Not because they lacked talent, but because Hollywood refused to see past the ghosts of who they used to be. That fake smile, they'd flash it every time your name got dragged back to a character, like you were nothing without it. Jaleel admitted there were nights he thought about walking away completely, disappearing from Hollywood like he never existed. But then Malcolm would call with that one line that cut through the darkness. We weren't made to be Urkel and Theo forever. We were born to keep standing. That wasn't just encouragement, that was survival. That was brotherhood. In an industry where black actors are rarely given space to play layered roles, let alone escape the ones that define them as kids, just refusing to quit was rebellion. And these two, they stayed in the fight, holding each other up when nobody else cared. Their friendship was never for show. They didn't broadcast it on red carpets, didn't chase headlines with staged moments. Maybe they feared the industry would twist it into some cheap storyline. Maybe they just knew some things were too sacred for the internet. But behind the scenes, it was rock solid. When Jaleel was hitting wall after wall in the 2000s, Malcolm was the first voice on the line. And when Malcolm's jazz gig in LA got shut down in 2014, Jaleel didn't post a single word. He just pulled up and sat front row. No cameras, no hashtags, no spotlight, just loyalty. But as the years passed, the truth got sharper. Hollywood was never invested in who they were becoming. It loved the laughs, the catchphrases, the teenage faces. But the second they wanted more than stereotypes, more than punchlines, the doors slammed heavier, the silence got louder, and the weight of being forgotten grew brutal. It pushed you to the margins. That's what Malcolm once told him. And then came the line that hit Jaleel like a straight punch to the chest. This industry raised me, but it never truly loved me. Jaleel went silent. He couldn't even form a response. Those words cut too deep. Maybe that's why Malcolm's sudden passing at just 54 didn't just bring grief, it shattered something inside Jaleel. He missed the last call, didn't pick up, never got the chance to say goodbye, never got to tell his brother, we made it. Whether the world saw it or not, they had survived, together. And then came the final sting, Malcolm's last voice note, a message that will haunt Jaleel for the rest of his life. If I don't make it to tomorrow, don't cry, just carry me in your work. That single line changed everything. Jaleel finally understood. Legacies don't live in trophies or staged red carpets. They live in truth, in connection, in being seen. They had been Urkel and Theo, sure, but they were more than characters. They were two black men who once lit up millions of living rooms across America, only to be shoved aside when the country moved on. Nobody ever asked if they wanted to carry those labels forever. Nobody checked in once the camera stopped rolling. They were boys forced to make everyone laugh while learning how to cry behind closed doors. But through it all, they endured, not because of fame, but because of friendship, because of those raw, late-night calls when the lights were off, the masks were dropped, and the only thing left was the truth between two men who refused to let Hollywood erase them. No scripts, no applause, just real talk. That was their bond, a quiet promise that no matter how they left this world, they would be remembered as men, not as ghosts of characters America refused to let go of. But when someone slips away in silence, there's no warning, no flashing lights, no final curtain call. Only a stillness that crashes down like thunder. Only someone who's lived under blinding spotlights can truly understand what it feels like to fade into shadows. Quietly, slowly, without sound. And the ones left behind are forced to face a chilling question. Did anyone really see him leave? At 54, Malcolm-Jamal Warner still looked like he was in his prime. He was still leveling up, actor, director, spoken word artist, poet, jazz bassist. He even won a Grammy in 2015. Nobody on the outside suspected the tide was already pulling him away from the shore. Nobody except Jaleel White. Those late-night convos had always been their lifeline, binding them together long after Theo and Urkel were cemented in America's memory. But one call, just 3 weeks before Malcolm passed, never stopped haunting Jaleel. Because Malcolm didn't drop any dramatic confessions, didn't sound broken or bitter, but something was different. His voice carried a strange stillness, a calm that felt wrong, not exhaustion, not burnout, more like the tone of a man putting things in order, like someone quietly tidying up before walking out the door for good. He once told Jaleel, "It's not about fame anymore, Jay. It's legacy, but who's gonna tell my story?" At first, Jaleel brushed it off, thinking Malcolm was just venting about another overlooked project. But later he realized it wasn't frustration at all. It was a goodbye, spoken softly, like a jazz note played offbeat, heavy, real, a warning hiding in plain sight. Even his closest friends felt the shift. In those last weeks, Malcolm quietly canceled 2 Atlanta performances. A podcast he'd hyped up for months just disappeared. No explanation, no follow-up. His socials went still, not silent, but unsettling. He started posting cryptic poems drenched in reflection, the kind of writing that sounded less like art and more like a man easing toward an ending. And then came the night in Brooklyn, a private gathering of Black creatives. Malcolm stood before them and delivered what would be his final spoken word performance. One line clung to every person in that room. "I leave my footprints on water so no one can keep them, but still know I was there." At first it sounded beautiful, poetic, but when reality caught up, that line turned haunting. Footprints on water don't last. They vanish before you can hold them. That wasn't just a verse, that was a warning. A farewell wrapped in rhythm. And maybe the scariest part, Malcolm had once confessed to close friends, "The ocean's the only place that never asked me to be anyone." Now, in hindsight, those words read less like poetry and more like prophecy. He would walk the shore for hours. No phone, no schedule, no noise, just waves, just peace. He once said, "Water makes me feel invisible, and because of that, safe." But after everything, those words hit different, too different. Because in the end, the ocean wasn't just his sanctuary, it became the last place Malcolm would ever go. On the morning of July 20th, 2025, news broke out of Le Mans, Costa Rica, and Hollywood froze. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the man who had helped shape an entire generation, was gone. They said he drowned in what officials called a sudden and unusual accident. No drugs in his system, no health red flags, no warning signs, just gone, like a candle blown out in the middle of the night. But for Jaleel White, it wasn't sudden at all, not in his gut, not after everything they had shared. He felt it coming, not through facts, but through that sixth sense born from years of carrying the same hidden pain. And then, hours after the world found out, his phone lit up. A voice note, unopened, buried beneath a flood of notifications. Malcolm had sent it just hours before walking into the sea. Jaleel later admitted, "I didn't even see it right away, but when I finally hit play, when I heard the second line, I dropped the phone." It was only 52 seconds long, but it broke him. Malcolm's voice, calm yet final, said, "Jay, this world is loud and rushed, but in silence we find truth. If I don't make it to tomorrow, just know the ocean gave me peace. Don't cry for me, bro. Carry me in your work." Those were the last words Malcolm left behind, words only a chosen few would ever hear. And after the funeral, Jaleel gathered a small, private circle of loved ones at his home, where the weight of those words hung heavy in the air, like a secret too powerful to fade. No music, no lights, just a dark room drowning in silence. And then Jaleel pressed play. The voice note filled the air, and one guest later recalled, "No one sobbed, but everyone cried, because we knew that was it. The final goodbye, no stage, no curtain call, just a farewell whispered in stillness." Jaleel never released that recording. He called it sacred. He didn't post it for likes, didn't clip it for a podcast, didn't parade it as content, because to him, this wasn't entertainment. It was a passing of the torch, soul to soul, and that's when the whisper started. Was Malcolm hiding depression behind his calm? Was this goodbye planned? Did he choose the ocean because it was the only place that ever made him feel free? The world speculated. But Jaleel stayed silent. He refused to feed the gossip. In one rare interview, though, he broke his quiet, softly admitting, "I don't think he wanted pity. I think he wanted to be understood." That was the key. Malcolm wasn't chasing sympathy or headlines. He wanted something deeper, to be truly heard, not by everyone, but by at least one soul who carried the same weight and could finish what he started. Because his story was never just about Theo Huxtable. It was about Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the man, the artist who chose existence in quiet over applause, who found truth in stillness, and who left this world on his own terms. Jaleel understood, and he swore to carry that message, not through noise, not through viral moments, but through action, through work, through silence that speaks louder than any cheer ever could. He made a promise. The world would not forget Malcolm. Because sometimes footprints left on water can echo louder than any standing ovation. No cameras, no live streams, no hashtags bouncing around the internet. Just flickering candles in a quiet LA room, gathered around a single photo no one had ever seen before. It wasn't the usual Hollywood image. Malcolm wasn't smiling, wasn't posing for a crowd. He was caught sideways, staring out a window, pen in hand, unfinished, like he still had one last story left to write. And beside the podium, an empty chair. On it rested his signature black fedora, the one he always wore at his poetry sets. No one touched it, no one even leaned too close, because everyone there knew that seat still belonged to him. He wasn't gone, not fully, not yet. When Jaleel White finally stepped forward, there was no MC, no spotlight, no applause. He didn't need an introduction. Nobody had to whisper, "That's the guy who played Urkel." Not here, not now. Because in that moment, he wasn't a character. He wasn't a catchphrase or a TV legend. He was a man, a brother trying to speak one last truth to the friend he never got to properly say goodbye to. His voice shook, barely rising above a whisper. "This isn't just about Malcolm," he said, eyes fixed on that empty chair. And in that silence, every soul in the room felt it. The weight of a goodbye too heavy for words, too sacred for the world to ever cheapen. "This is about everything we've done wrong to people like him." The room froze, not a sound. Some expected jokes, maybe a sweet story, maybe a polished tribute, but Jaleel wasn't there to soothe anybody. He came to call it out. He ripped the curtain down. He said the truth, how black artists get celebrated when they shine, then abandoned the second they slip, how the industry conditions young black talent to smile through pain, to swallow it all, to never let the cracks show. "We, the black kids raised on your screens," he said, "were taught to hold ourselves together, to be polite, be grateful, be strong, to smile through the struggle, because if we showed weakness, we might lose the audience forever." And in that silence, the truth hit like thunder. Jaleel's voice wavered, his guard finally breaking. He shared a moment no one in that room had ever heard before. Malcolm once called him at 2 a.m., not to rant, not even to ask for advice, just to breathe. "I can't hold it together anymore, Jay," Malcolm had admitted. "I don't know if anyone still sees me, or if they only see Theo." Back then, Jaleel had replied with what felt safe. "Go to sleep. Tomorrow will be better." But standing there now, he admitted he wasn't sure anymore. Maybe Malcolm hadn't needed comfort. Maybe he didn't want pity. Maybe all he needed was to be seen, not as Theo, not as a TV star, but as a man stripped bare. Jaleel's eyes dropped, his hand wiping across his face. And then, with the whole room holding its breath, he finally spoke the truth that had been eating him alive ever since. "I wish I hadn't been so quick to believe he was okay. I wish I had told him. He didn't always have to be the symbol." Jaleel's voice cracked as he turned toward the chair, the one holding Malcolm's fedora, like he was asking his brother if he was listening. And then he spoke words that cut the room in half. "Malcolm once told me, if one day I disappear, tell them I'm not angry, I'm just tired." The sentence shattered the air like the final line of a poem no one wanted to end. Because Malcolm was never the type to complain. He carried his weight like it was just part of the job, or worse, part of the silent duty black men are expected to shoulder without breaking. One guest later said, "That wasn't a eulogy, that was a confession." And they were right. Jaleel wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to entertain. He wasn't even speaking just for himself. He was apologizing for the system that built black TV legends, only to lock them inside roles they were never allowed to outgrow. No hashtags, no slogans, no performative speech about change. Jaleel simply walked to the empty chair, lifted Malcolm's fedora, placed it gently back down, and bowed his head. His whisper carried more power than any speech could. You weren't just Theo, Malcolm. You were my brother, and I won't let them forget who you were. That moment said everything. There were no press cameras, no Hollywood stage, just candles flickering and a truth too heavy for the world outside to handle. But in the corner of that room, someone had quietly pressed record on their phone, capturing the rawest goodbye Malcolm-Jamal Warner would ever get. Hours later, the audio leaked online, and when the world heard Jaleel's whisper, he wasn't angry, he was just tired. Hollywood froze. One TikTok comment said it best. That wasn't a memorial. That was a torch being passed. And from that moment on, nobody could box Malcolm-Jamal Warner into Little Theo Huxtable anymore. That name didn't fit. People finally started calling him what he truly was: a poet, a truth-teller, a man of depth who left behind a haunting line: "Don't cry for me, carry me in your work." And those words didn't fade. They roared louder than applause. And the one now carrying that torch, Jaleel White. Not with a Hollywood comeback, not with some flashy headline-grabbing role, but through silence. The same silence Malcolm once chose for himself. After the funeral, Malcolm's home was still. Empty staircases, quiet rooms heavy with absence. His family began sorting through what remained. Unfinished jazz riffs scribbled on paper, old dusty backstage snapshots from the Cosby show days. For a while, it all looked ordinary, until someone opened a frayed leather bag. Inside was something no one expected: a thick handwritten journal, no title, no table of contents, just raw pages, ink and emotion bleeding across paper. This wasn't a polished manuscript. It wasn't a poetry book ready for publishing. It wasn't a travel diary filled with pretty memories. It was something far more dangerous, something deeper. The real diary of Malcolm-Jamal Warner, and inside those pages, his truths, his doubts, his voice, finally free from the grip of fame. And it wasn't some polished monologue, it wasn't crafted poetry, it was a whisper stretched across years, the slow cry of a man still chained to a role that had ended more than 30 years ago. The very first page of the journal was dated 2017, and the opening line sent chills through everyone who laid eyes on it. I feel like I'm screaming underwater, smiling at all the people watching from the shore while I slowly run out of air. Not flashy, not flowery, just raw. The unfiltered truth of someone drowning in expectations, forced to wear a smile for a world that never once asked how he was really doing. Malcolm didn't write in that journal every single day, but when he did, the words cut deep. The pages revealed years of exhaustion, not from work, not from art, but from fighting against an identity the public refused to release. I'm not Theo anymore, I haven't been for decades, but to the world, I'll never be anyone else. That weight wasn't limited to red carpets or casting calls. It followed him everywhere, into diners, into business meetings, onto sidewalks. When I walk into a room, people don't see me. They see nostalgia. They see their childhood. They don't see today. And they never ask how I'm feeling. Then came the line that stopped everyone cold, even the people who thought they knew him best. Malcolm admitted that for years. He had felt invisible. Invisible while still creating. Invisible while still performing. Invisible even while the industry kept praising him on the surface. It wasn't fame he was running from. It was erasure. The slow, silent way the world applauds you for the past, but refuses to see you in the present. On the outside, Malcolm looked like he was thriving, but on the inside, he was questioning everything. If I'm no longer Theo, am I still worth remembering? That single line cut like a blade, not out of bitterness, but brutal honesty. Yet the journal didn't stay locked in darkness. Toward the later pages, the tone shifted. He wasn't just drowning in pain anymore. He was searching for peace. He revealed he had started therapy. He admitted he wanted to finally speak out, to release what he'd been forced to hold in for decades. The pages read like a man ready to unburden himself, ready to show the world the truth behind the mask. One section of the journal stood out above the rest. Malcolm described a dream, a real one. He wanted to create a TV series unlike anything on screen at the time, a show about the mental health struggles of Black men. I want to create a series about people like me. People once loved for making others laugh, but never allowed to show pain. I want to show that healing isn't always neat, and that silence isn't strength. There was no press release, no Hollywood machine backing him, just scribbled outlines on torn pages, the fragments of an idea that felt too raw for executives to ever greenlight. He was sketching out the series the industry never let him create, the one he needed to make. And then, the journal stopped. No farewell, no final send-off, no polished last words, just blank space, as if the story was still in motion, as if he'd been interrupted mid-thought, as if Malcolm-Jamal Warner had more to say, words the world was never meant to hear. Barely legible, scrawled like a final plea, was one last line in Malcolm's journal. If this ends, promise me one thing, someone will read it and finally see me. And now, that promise is being kept. His family and inner circle are preparing to release pieces of the journal, not to glorify pain, not to package grief for profit, but to finally pull Malcolm out from under the shadow of nostalgia that trapped him for decades. The world never let go of the sitcom's son, the teenage icon, the safe symbol, but it never gave him space to simply exist as a man. Now his voice, raw, unfiltered, unpolished, is reaching those who need it most. The ones still smiling on the outside while quietly drowning inside. Not everyone got to hear Malcolm's final words in life, but through these pages, words never meant for public eyes, the world is finally meeting him. Not Theo, not a punchline, not an icon in suspenders. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the man. A voice that didn't need scandal, didn't need clickbait. He left this world not in chaos, but in stillness. And somehow that quiet exit, that so-called unusual drowning accident, is now echoing louder than any role he ever played. A rip current may have pulled him under, a man who had been searching for peace his entire life. But that moment in the ocean wasn't an ending. If anything, it was the beginning of something bigger. Because just days after the heartbreaking news, something strange happened. Hollywood stopped. The industry hit pause, as if even the machine didn't know how to move forward. And this time, the tributes didn't feel rehearsed. They felt shaken. No polished PR statements, no glossy red carpet flashbacks. This time, the words came unfiltered. People who had worked with Malcolm, people who had grown up watching him, began speaking from the gut, with regret, with reflection, and even with shame. The question hit hard. Had anyone ever truly seen him? Or had we only seen the character, the symbol, never the soul behind it? Jaleel White, the last friend to hear Malcolm's voice, refused to stay silent. He stood tall and spoke from the heart. He called out the weight Black artists are forced to carry, how they're praised when they're perfect, punished the moment they stumble, expected to always smile, never break, never show pain, never be anything less than unshakable. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, just candles, an empty chair, and Malcolm's favorite fedora sitting at the center of the room. Yet that speech hit harder than any network tribute could ever script. It was truth, raw, uncomfortable, undeniable. And then the story started to surface. Not the polished, Hollywood-approved memories, the real ones. People who knew Malcolm, not as an icon, but as a man, finally spoke up. They remembered him strumming a guitar backstage when no one was watching, slipping into poetry during quiet breaks, guiding younger actors without ever asking for applause, always calm, always smiling. But now, in hindsight, they realized what had been buried under that smile. He had been carrying something heavy, something silent all along. The same man who once confessed on paper, "I'm screaming underwater but still smiling at the world." This was the same man who once dreamed of creating a series about Black men's mental health, a dream that Hollywood never greenlit, never even gave a chance to begin. But now, we're finally listening. Nobody could rewrite Malcolm's ending, but because of him, hundreds started writing their own. A movement quietly erupted across social media with one rallying cry: remember the person, not just the character. And it wasn't just talk. Sitcom actors who had been discarded after a single season stepped forward. Writers once kicked out of rooms for being too real finally spoke their truth. Background players who'd been invisible for years suddenly began stepping into the light. Malcolm, once trapped in the long shadow of past fame, had transformed into something far greater, a symbol for those ready to reclaim their voices. Not applause for the roles they played, but permission to grieve, to be vulnerable, to walk away from the mask the world glued onto them without consent. One young performer posted, "I never met Malcolm, but because of him, I stopped smiling for the camera when my heart was breaking." A Black director who had once been told to just write what sells, revealed he had dusted off a short film that had sat on the shelf for 6 years. A raw story about the hidden pain of depressed Black men. "I don't know if it'll win anything," he admitted, "but I know Malcolm would have watched it." And that's what legacy truly looks like. Not trophies, not statues, not fleeting headlines, but courage handed down. A ripple effect of truth. A cultural shift born out of silence, and a man who refused to be forgotten. A door has been cracked open, and now others are walking through it. Malcolm didn't just leave behind memories of who he was. He lit a spark, a movement of people daring to finally show who they really are. Malcolm-Jamal Warner left this world carrying the weight of his own story, a story the industry never let him put down. For years, the world stayed silent while he quietly drowned beneath the symbol they forced him to be. But now, people are listening, and sometimes even the smallest bit of awareness is enough to save someone else. That is Malcolm's legacy, not built from red carpets, not from trophies, but from silence that spoke louder than applause. He lived, he created, and he left this world as an artist who was celebrated by many, but truly seen by so few. A symbol, yes, but also a man buried beneath that symbol. In the end, he didn't need nostalgia. He didn't need the laugh track. He just needed to be heard, fully, truthfully, without interruption. And now his story doesn't belong to just him anymore. It belongs to all of us. It leaves us with one haunting question. Do we really see the person behind the role? Do we look beyond the smile, beyond the surface, and notice when someone is sinking in silence? If this story made you feel something real, don't let it vanish into the noise. Like this video, share it, drop a comment below. Your voice matters here. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're not done. There are more stories to tell, more voices to uncover, and more people long trapped in memory who deserve to finally be seen with clear eyes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.